The dense woods whispered with the sound of rustling leaves as a single figure moved through the trees. The man, a reclusive woodsman named Elias, was no stranger to these woods. He had spent the better part of his life cutting timber and living alone in a small cabin deep within the forest. The world outside was a place he no longer wished to visit, preferring the solitude and peace that the wilderness offered. Elias's life was simple. Each day was spent with the rhythm of chopping wood, repairing tools, and tending to his modest cabin. But today, something felt different. There was an uneasy stillness in the air, a sense that the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As he moved through the underbrush, Elias came upon a clearing, and there, lying motionless on the ground, was a creature he had never expected to see. A wolf. The wolf's fur was matted and torn, its body twisted in a way that suggested it had been struggling for hours. Its eyes were dull with pain, but there was still a fire in them, a fire that had yet to be extinguished. Elias hesitated. Wolves were not uncommon in these woods, but they were usually elusive, avoiding humans at all costs. The sight of this one, injured and helpless, stirred something deep within him. For a moment, Elias stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He had never encountered an animal in such a state before. He had seen predators up close, bears, coyotes, and the occasional mountain lion, but this was different. The wolf's eyes were not the eyes of a hunter. They were the eyes of a creature in need. His instincts as a woodsman told him to leave the wolf alone, to allow nature to take its course. But something in the creature's gaze, a pleading, almost human-like expression, moved him. Elias felt a tug at his heart. He couldn't just leave it to die here, alone and in pain. With a deep sigh, Elias knelt beside the wolf, cautiously extending his hand toward its injured leg. It had been caught in a poacher's trap, one of those cruel iron jaws designed to maim and kill. The wolf flinched at first, but then, as Elias gently pressed his hand to its fur, it relaxed slightly, as though recognizing that the woodsman meant no harm. "Easy now," Elias murmured, his voice calm and steady. "I won't hurt you." With great care, Elias assessed the injury. The wolf's leg was swollen, the wound red and raw from the trap. The bleeding had stopped, but infection was a real concern. Elias knew he needed to act quickly if the wolf was going to survive. Using the skills he had learned over the years, patching up his own injuries, mending his tools, and caring for the few animals that passed through his land, he set to work. He fashioned a makeshift splint from a nearby branch, using his belt as a binding to hold the wolf's leg steady. It was a crude attempt, but it would have to do. As he worked, the wolf lay still, its heavy breathing the only sound in the quiet clearing. Elias's mind raced. He had no idea how this would play out. Would the wolf hate him for helping? Would it see him as a threat? But as he finished securing the splint, the wolf gave a low, appreciative growl, and Elias couldn't help but smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wolf would live. Elias stayed by the wolf's side for hours, his hands gentle as he applied a salve to the injured leg, a mixture of herbs and oil that he'd learned to make from his time in the woods. The wolf's breathing was slow but steady, its body trembling slightly from the pain, but it never once tried to bite or lash out. It seemed to trust Elias, or perhaps in its exhaustion, it simply lacked the energy to resist. As nightfall descended upon the forest, Elias made the decision to move the wolf to his cabin. He couldn't leave the creature out here in the cold, especially with such a serious injury. Slowly, with great care, he lifted the wolf onto his back, supporting it as best as he could. The wolf's weight was heavier than he anticipated, but he managed to carry it across the familiar terrain, using his instincts as a woodsman to navigate through the darkness. His cabin was small but cozy, nestled beneath the shelter of towering pines. Inside, the warmth of the hearth greeted him as he crossed the threshold, the fire crackling merrily in the stone fireplace. He laid the wolf down near the fire on a bed of hay and blankets, then immediately went to work preparing food and fresh water for both himself and his unexpected guest. For days, Elias cared for the wolf, tending to its wounds and feeding it a mixture of broth and meat scraps. The wolf's eyes, once dull and pained, began to brighten, the fire within them slowly returning. It was a slow process, and Elias was patient. He had learned the value of patience through years of working with nature's rhythms. As the days passed, the bond between them deepened. Elias spoke to the wolf softly as he worked, though he knew it could not understand his words. Still, there was something therapeutic about sharing his thoughts with the animal, something that calmed his own restless mind. And the wolf in turn would watch him with keen, intelligent eyes, seemingly understanding the man's intentions. One morning, Elias awoke to find the wolf sitting near the hearth, its head raised high and alert. It seemed stronger now, its movements more fluid and confident. The wound on its leg had healed, though it still favored the limb. Elias knew that the wolf was far from being fully recovered, but it was clear that it had made tremendous progress. "You're doing better," Elias murmured, offering the wolf a bowl of meat. The wolf accepted it gratefully, eating with a hunger that made Elias smile. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the wolf became more independent. It no longer relied on Elias for food, though it still lingered by his side, watching him with a steady, unspoken trust. The woodsman had come to regard the wolf not as a wild creature, but as a companion, an unlikely but loyal friend. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above, Elias stood outside, gazing into the dense woods. He often found himself staring into the trees, lost in thought, as if the forest itself held secrets only it could tell. The wolf, now fully recovered, had taken to wandering the edge of the forest, always returning by nightfall to the warmth of the cabin. "Be careful," Elias would say, watching the wolf disappear into the trees. "The forest can be dangerous, even for a creature like you." But the wolf never seemed to fear the woods. It moved with confidence, a creature of the forest through and through. Then, one fateful evening, everything changed. Elias had just finished his evening meal and was sitting by the fire, warming his hands, when he heard it, an eerie, low growl in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a coyote. No, this was something different, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The wolf, who had been lying near the fire, raised its head and perked its ears. Its body tensed, its eyes narrowing. There was a shift in the air, a tension that neither Elias nor the wolf could ignore. Suddenly the wolf stood and bolted toward the door, its movement swift and powerful. Elias jumped to his feet, instinctively grabbing the closest weapon, an old, worn axe he used to chop wood. He had no idea what the danger was, but he knew that if the wolf was reacting this way, it meant something serious was afoot. He reached the door just as the wolf disappeared into the night, running into the forest. The growling continued, louder now, closer. Elias hesitated for a moment, torn between following the wolf and securing his cabin. But something told him that if he didn't follow the wolf now, he would regret it. With a deep breath, Elias stepped into the night, his footsteps crunching on the frozen earth as he moved toward the source of the ominous sound. The forest, once so familiar, now felt foreign and foreboding. And then in the moonlight he saw them. A group of figures, dark, shadowy, and menacing, was encircling the woodsman's cabin. They were poachers, dangerous men who had been known to trap animals for sport, to take whatever they wanted from the forest without any regard for its creatures or its balance. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as the realization hit him. The poachers had come for the wolf. The poachers were closing in, their figures casting long shadows as they stalked toward Elias's cabin. He could hear their coarse voices, their laughter, as they plotted to trap whatever animals they could find. The air was thick with tension, and his mind raced, calculating the best course of action. Elias gripped the axe tighter, knowing that the odds were against him. He was just one man, and they were several. The woodsman was skilled with the axe, but he had no experience fighting off a group of armed men. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the wolf by his side, but it was nowhere in sight. Then he heard it again, the sound of the wolf's low growl, but this time it was louder, stronger, and it wasn't just the wolf. A chorus of growls filled the air, echoing through the trees like a warning bell. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the sound. Through the moonlit forest he saw them emerging from the shadows, the wolf's pack. There were 6 of them, their bodies sleek and powerful, their eyes glowing with a primal intensity. The leader, the wolf that Elias had nursed back to health, stepped forward, its fur bristling and its muscles coiled like a spring. The others flanked it, their eyes fixed on the poachers, their growls low and menacing. Elias's heart swelled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The wolf had not only healed, but had returned with its pack to protect him. It was a gesture of loyalty and trust, one that Elias would never forget. The poachers, sensing the shift in the air, stopped in their tracks. One of them raised a rifle, his eyes wide with fear as he spotted the pack of wolves approaching. "What in the hell?" he muttered, his voice trembling. The pack moved as one, their bodies flowing through the forest like shadows, each member perfectly synchronized with the next. The leader, the wolf Elias had saved, took the lead, its piercing gaze fixed on the poachers. The growls grew louder, more insistent, and the men hesitated, unsure of what to do. You'd better leave now," Elias called out, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. He knew the poachers wouldn't hesitate to fight, but the wolves were ready to defend their territory, and Elias at all costs. One of the poachers raised his rifle and aimed it at the leader of the pack. "I'll shoot that damn wolf if it comes any closer," he shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could act, the wolf lunged forward, a blur of motion. The poacher barely had time to react before the wolf was upon him, its jaws snapping with precision. The man cried out in terror as he stumbled back, dropping the rifle. The other poachers scrambled to react, but the wolves were too fast. Elias watched in stunned silence as the pack surrounded the men, their movements coordinated and swift. There was no bloodshed, no violence beyond the initial shock. The wolves were asserting dominance, chasing the poachers off their land without killing them. Just enough force to send the message. The forest was not theirs to control. As the poachers fled into the night, the leader of the wolf pack stood tall, its eyes never leaving Elias. The woodsman breathed a sigh of relief, the weight of the moment settling in. The wolf had not only saved him, but it had also shown Elias the strength of their bond. For a long moment, neither Elias nor the wolf moved. They simply stood in the moonlight, the forest around them eerily quiet after the confrontation. The wolves, now at ease, began to disperse, their steps light and graceful as they vanished back into the depths of the woods. Elias turned and walked back toward his cabin, the wolf following closely behind. His heart still raced from the encounter, but now a sense of gratitude and respect filled him. The bond between him and the wolf was unbreakable. It wasn't just a creature he had helped, it had become his protector, his equal, and a part of something much larger than he could ever have imagined. Inside the cabin, Elias closed the door behind him and stoked the fire, the warmth of the hearth a welcome relief after the tension of the night. The wolf settled near the fire, its body curling into a comfortable position as it watched Elias with a calm, almost knowing expression. "You've saved me," Elias whispered, his voice full of awe. "I never expected this. Never expected you to come back. With all of them." The wolf's eyes softened, and for a moment it almost seemed to smile. Elias chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I guess we're more alike than I thought, you and I." From that night on, the bond between the woodsman and the wolf was unshakable. The wolf would continue to visit, and Elias would welcome it into his home, his protector and companion. But the woodsman knew, deep in his heart, that there would always be more dangers lurking in the forest, and that the wolf and its pack would be there to face them together.